My son sold my house and kicked me out when I gave him an envelope at his wedding. He collapsed. My name is George, and I am 80 years old. I have lived through wars and recessions and the death of my beloved wife, but nothing prepared me for what my own son would do to me. This is my story of betrayal and justice, and the envelope that changed everything forever. I was born in 1946 in a small village in Yorkshire, England. My father was a farmer, and my mother was a schoolteacher. We didn't have much, but we had the land, and we had each other. I grew up working the fields, learning to fix fences and tend sheep and drive a tractor. Was a hard life, but it was honest. I met my wife, Margaret, when I was 21 at a village dance. She was the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, with red hair and freckles and a laugh that could light up the darkest room. We married a year later and moved to a small cottage on the edge of the village. It needed work. The roof leaked and the windows were drafty, but Margaret said, "George, this is our home, and we will make it beautiful." And we did. Over the next 40 years. We fixed every room. We planted a garden. We raised a son. We built a life. We had one child, a boy we named Thomas. Thomas was our pride and joy. Margaret wanted more children, but it was not to be, so we poured all our love into Thomas. We saved every penny for his education. We bought him books and toys and took him on holidays to the seaside. We worked extra shifts so he could have the things we never had. Thomas was smart, very smart. He did well in school and went to university in London. He became a solicitor, a lawyer, and we were so proud. We told everyone our son, the lawyer. We had no idea that becoming a lawyer would teach him how to steal from his own father. Margaret died in 2015, cancer. Took her slowly, painfully, cruelly. I held her hand every day in that hospital. I told her I loved her. I told her I would be okay. I told her not to worry about me, and she looked at me with those beautiful eyes and said, "George, take care of our son." And then she was gone. I was lost without her for months. I wandered around our cottage talking to her photograph, sleeping on her side of the bed, crying in the garden where she used to tend her roses. Thomas came to visit for the funeral and stayed for 3 days. Then he went back to London, and I was alone. I was 70 years old and alone for the first time in my life. I had no idea how to be alone. Margaret had been my everything for 47 years, and now she was gone. After Margaret died, Thomas started visiting more often. Every few months, he would drive up from London in his fancy car, wearing his fancy suits, and he would look around our little cottage with an expression I could not read. He would say, "Dad, this place is falling apart. You can't live here alone. You need to move somewhere smaller, somewhere easier to manage." I would say, "Thomas, this is my home. This is where I raised you. This is where your mother died. I am not leaving." He would shake his head and say, "Dad, you are being stubborn. One day you will fall, and no one will find you for days." I said, "I will take that chance, son." For 5 years, I stayed in that cottage. I fixed what I could. I let the rest fall into ruin. I didn't care. I just wanted to be near Margaret. I talked to her every night, and I felt her listening. I know she was listening. In 2020, Thomas came to visit with a woman named Rachel. She was beautiful and cold, and she looked at our little cottage with barely concealed disgust. She said, "George, this place is charming in a rustic sort of way." I knew then that she was troubled. Thomas took me aside that evening and said, "Dad, Rachel and I are getting married." I was happy for him. I really was. I said, "That is wonderful news, son. When is the wedding?" He said, "In 6 months. And Dad, I need to talk to you about something." I said, "What is it?" He said, "Dad, the wedding is going to be expensive, and we need some money to put a deposit on a house in London." I said, "Son, I don't have much money. You know that your mother and I live modestly." He said, "Dad, you have this cottage. It must be worth something you could sell." I stared at him. I said, "Sell the cottage. This is your mother's home. This is where she lived and died. I cannot sell it." He said, "Dad, be reasonable. You are old. You can't live here forever. The place is falling down. You would be better off in a nice flat near us where we can look after you." I said, "Thomas, I don't want to leave." He said, "Dad, please think about it, Rachel, and I need your help. We can't afford a house in London without some help." I said, "I will think about it, son, but I cannot promise anything over the next few months." Thomas increased the pressure. He called every week asking if I had made a decision. He came to visit with Rachel, and they would walk around the cottage pointing out problems. "Look at this damp. Look at this crack in the ceiling. Look at this old wiring. It is not safe. Dad, you could die in this place." Rachel would say, "George, don't you want to see your grandchildren one day? You can't be a grandfather living in this dump." I felt myself weakening. I was old and tired and lonely, and the idea of being near my son and maybe having grandchildren was tempting. I talked to Margaret's photograph every night. I said, "Margaret, what should I do? I feel like I'm betraying you by selling our home, but I am so alone, and Thomas needs me." I never got an answer, not then. Finally, I agreed. I told Thomas he could sell the cottage and use the money for a house in London and for the wedding. He was overjoyed. He hugged me and said, "Dad, you won't regret this, I promise. We will take care of you." I moved out of the cottage with one small suitcase, the same suitcase I had brought with me when I married Margaret 50 years earlier. I watched as strangers loaded my furniture into a van. I watched as the door closed on my home for the last time. I cried, and I felt Margaret crying with me. The cottage sold for £250,000. All of it went to Thomas. He said he would put in a joint account for us, but I never saw that money again, not a penny. Thomas and Rachel found me a small flat in a bad part of London. It was one room with a kitchenette and a bathroom, so small you could barely turn around the window, looked out a brick wall. The building smelled of curry and cigarettes, and the neighbors shouted all night. Thomas said, "Dad, it is temporary until we find something better." But better never came. I lived in that flat for 2 years while Thomas and Rachel bought a beautiful house in Chelsea with my money. They had a big wedding at a fancy hotel, and I was not invited. Thomas said, "Dad, it is a small wedding, just close friends, you'll be bored." I later saw photos online, hundreds of guests, and I was not one of them. I sat in my tiny flat looking at those photos on my phone, and I cried. After the wedding, Thomas forgot about me completely. He stopped calling, he stopped visiting. When I called him, he would say, "Dad, I am busy, I will call you back." But he never did. I spent my 80th birthday alone in that flat eating a sandwich and talking to Margaret's photograph. I said, "Margaret, our son has forgotten us. He has taken everything and left us with nothing. I am sorry. I am so sorry I let this happen." And then something happened that changed everything. One day, I received a letter. It was from a solicitor in Yorkshire, the village where I grew up. I opened it with shaking hands and read words that made my heart stop. The letter said, "Dear Mr. Wilson, we are writing to inform you that your Aunt Beatrice has passed away at the age of 97. She has left you her entire estate, including her house and land in Yorkshire." I sat down on my bed. My legs would not hold me. My Aunt Beatrice, my father's sister, I had not seen her in 40 years. She was a recluse who lived alone in the family farmhouse. I never knew she had money, but apparently she did. The estate was worth over £800,000. I did not tell Thomas, not right away. I needed time to think. I went to Yorkshire and met with a solicitor, a kind woman named Mrs. Holmes. She showed me the papers, the farmhouse, the land, the savings account. I signed everything and became the owner of property, worth nearly £1 million. Mrs. Holmes said, "Mr. Wilson, what would you like to do with this?" I thought for a moment, and then I had an idea. I said, "Mrs. Holmes, I want to buy a house in Chelsea." She looked confused. She said, "Chelsea is very expensive." I smiled and said, "I know exactly which house." I hired a private investigator to find out about Thomas and Rachel's finances. It did not take long. They had spent all my money. The £250,000 from my cottage was gone, spent on their house and wedding and cars and holidays. They had a big mortgage on their Chelsea house, and they were struggling to make the payments. Rachel had expensive tastes, and Thomas was drowning in debt. They were one missed payment away from losing everything. I smiled when I heard this, and I made my plan. I contacted a solicitor in London, a different one not connected to Thomas, and I made him an offer on Thomas and Rachel's house. They did not know who was buying it. The offer was made through a shell company. I created the offer was for the full market value, £450,000, enough to pay off their mortgage and give them some profit. They accepted immediately. They had no idea that the buyer was the old man they had thrown away a few weeks later. I received an invitation in the mail. It was for Rachel's sister's wedding. I was not invited to the wedding itself, but to the reception afterwards. I think Rachel felt guilty, or maybe her mother insisted on inviting me. Either way, I had an invitation. And I had a plan. I called Mrs. Holmes and said, "I need you to prepare an envelope for me." She said, "What kind of envelope?" I said, "A legal envelope with documents showing that I now own their house." She said, "Mr. Wilson, that will destroy them." I said, "I know the reception was held at a fancy hotel in central London. I arrive in a taxi, wearing the only suit. I own an old thing from 20 years ago, but it was clean and pressed. I walked into the ballroom and saw them, Thomas and Rachel, at a table with their fancy friends, drinking champagne and laughing. When Thomas saw me, his face went pale. He came over and said, "Dad, what are you doing here?" I said, "I was invited, son." He said, "You should not have come. This is embarrassing for us." I said, "I will not stay long, son. I just have some to give you." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the envelope. It was thick and white with Thomas' name written on it. I said, "Here, son. This is a wedding gift for Rachel's sister from me." Thomas took it looking confused. He said, "Dad, you didn't need to bring anything." I said, "Open it." Later, "Not now." And I left. I walked out of that hotel. and got in my taxi and went home to my tiny flat. And I waited. The phone rang at 11 that night. It was Thomas. He was screaming, "Dad, what is this? What have you done?" I said calmly, "What do you mean, son?" He said, "This document. This says you own our house. You bought our house. How did you do this?" I said, "I have money, son, money. I inherited from your great Aunt Beatrice, the one you never visited, the one you forgot about, just like you forgot about me." He was crying now. He said, "Dad, please, no, you can't do. This we have nowhere to go. Rachel is pregnant. We're going to lose everything." I said, "You should have thought of that before you took my cottage and left me in a rat-infested flat for 2 years before you forgot my birthday and excluded me from your wedding before you treated me like garbage after I gave you everything." He said, "Dad, please, I am begging you. I will do anything." I said, "Anything, son?" He said, "Yes, anything." I said, "Then come to my flat tomorrow at noon, and we will talk." Thomas came to my flat the next day. He looked terrible. His eyes were red. His clothes were wrinkled. He sat on my small bed because there was only one chair. And he said, "Dad, please, what can I do to fix this?" I said, "Thomas, I am going to give you a chance, but you must listen carefully and do exactly what I say." He nodded. I said, "First, you will sell this flat for me and use the money to buy me a nice cottage in Yorkshire near where I grew up." He said, "Yes, Dad, of course." I said, "Second, you will pay me back every penny you stole from me plus interest over the next 10 years. He said, "Yes, Dad, I will." I said, "Third, and this is the most important, you will come and visit me every Sunday with my grandchild when it is born, and you will learn to be a son again, and you will teach your child to respect their elders." He was crying freely now. He said, "Yes, Dad, yes, I will do all of it. I promise." I said, "And Thomas." He looked up. I said, "A house in Chelsea. I am not taking it away from you, not completely. I will transfer half ownership to you and Rachel, but I will keep the other half. And if you ever forget me again, if you ever treat me badly again, I will sell my half to someone who will make your life hell. Do you understand?" He said, "I understand, Dad. Thank you so much." That was 3 years ago today. I live in a beautiful cottage in Yorkshire with a garden where I grow roses just like Margaret used. Thomas comes to visit every Sunday with his daughter, my granddaughter, Lily, who is 2 years old, and calls me Grandpa George, and climbs on my lap and laughs. We have dinner together, and we talk, and slowly, we are healing. Rachel even comes sometimes, and she is different now, humbler, kinder. I think almost losing everything. Change of the house in Chelsea is still theirs, but they know I own half, and they know that their security depends on treating me with respect. I don't want revenge anymore. I just want my family back, and now I have it. My friends, if you are reading this and you are old and alone, do not give up hope. Life is long and strange and full of surprises. Your children may forget you now, but the universe has a way of balancing things. Hold on to your dignity. Hold on to your hope. And if you get a second chance, use it wisely. I am 83 years old, and I have learned that forgiveness is not weakness. It is strength. It is the hardest thing in the world to forgive someone who hurt you, but it is also the most beautiful. Margaret taught me that. She taught me that love is the only thing that matters, and that families can heal if both sides are willing to try. And to every child reading this, I say this: your parents are not an ATM. They are not a burden. They are not a problem to be solved. They are the people who gave you life, who changed your nappies, who stayed up all night when you were sick, who worked and sacrificed and loved you a love so fierce and so deep that you cannot even imagine it until you have children of your own. Do not throw them away. When they become old, do not take their money and leave them to rot, because one day you'll be old too, and you will want someone to love you the way you should have loved them. My name is George Wilson. I am 83 years old. I live in a cottage in Yorkshire with roses in the garden, and a photograph of my Margaret on the mantelpiece. My son Thomas visits every Sunday with my granddaughter Lily, and we have dinner together, and we laugh and we cry, and we are family again. And that, my friends, is the greatest victory of all. The end.